The room smelled like arrogance, cologne, leather chairs, and overpaid entitlement. I walked in right on time. Not early, not late. Just invisible enough for them to believe I was no one. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. My heels echoed against the marble floor as I entered the executive boardroom of Kessler Dynamics, a company known for its cutthroat board and even crueler CEO. I wore a simple black blazer, my hair tied neatly, no flashy jewelry. Just a clipboard in one hand, and the calm of someone used to being overlooked. "Meeting's about to start," barked a voice behind me, laced with superiority. "You lost, honey?" I turned slightly. Garrett Langston, VP of Product Development, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. His hair was too gelled, his Rolex too tight, and his mouth just a little too confident. Before I could speak, he snapped his fingers. Snapped. His fingers. "Be a darling and fetch some coffee, will you? No cream, 3 sugars. You might want to run. Meeting starts in 2. The room chuckled. Not a belly laugh, no, it was worse than that. It was the smug kind, the kind that says we know exactly where you belong. In the corner. With your mouth shut. Taking notes. Or bringing beverages. I smiled. Just slightly. Not because I was humiliated, but because I'd seen this play before. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just here for observation. I was the observation. My father, Richard Monroe, the elusive private equity titan who'd quietly bought a 41% stake in Kessler Dynamics 6 months ago, had sent me. Not as a shadow investor. Not as an intern. As a test. He wanted to see how deep the rot went before taking full control. And I'd insisted I be the one to assess it. To see firsthand how the people we'd soon be leading treated the ones they thought had no power. Spoiler. Not well. Garrett leaned forward again, flashing teeth that probably cost more than a used car. "Better hurry, sweetheart." Chop chop. The CEO, Charles Brennan, silver-haired, power-hungry, and blind with ego, finally walked in, clapping once. "Let's go, people. No time to waste." I walked toward the coffee machine just to let them settle. I needed them to talk, without knowing I was listening. "I swear to God," Garrett whispered to the man beside him, "HR sends us another one of these interns with a diversity quota and no brain. I'm walking." "Oh, come on," the man replied, chuckling. "At least she's nice to look at. Probably doesn't know what EBITDA stands for." I poured the coffee slowly. 3 sugars. No cream. Took my time. They were already discussing layoffs like they were rearranging furniture. One guy pitched firing 20% of the customer service staff to impress shareholders. Another wanted to quietly slash maternity leave benefits to reduce HR liabilities. These weren't just businessmen. They were cowards dressed in custom suits. I walked back in. Instead of handing the coffee to Garrett, I placed it on the table in front of an empty chair. The chair at the head of the table. Charles Brennan blinked. "Excuse me. Miss, you're in the wrong seat. That's mine." I looked him dead in the eye and set my clipboard down. "No, Mr. Brennan," I said, calm and clear. "This seat's mine now." The room froze. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Garrett looked like he'd swallowed his Rolex. I pulled out a folded document from the clipboard. Effective 8 a.m. today, this company's controlling shares have been consolidated under Monroe Holdings. That means my father, Richard Monroe, is now the majority investor. I paused. And this morning, he gave me full proxy authority, which means I'm not just here to observe. I'm here to lead. Garrett's jaw literally dropped. One of the interns choked on their coffee. And Charles Brennan? He laughed. Until I placed the second page on the table. A termination letter, with his name on it. Signed. Sealed. Delivered. The next 2 seconds stretched into a lifetime. "Wait just a minute," he tried. I cut him off with a single raised hand. "No. You wait. You mocked me. You underestimated me. And you let your board rot from the inside out while you counted your bonuses. You ran this company like a country club, not a corporation. I locked eyes with Garrett. And you, snapping your fingers like you owned me? I wouldn't trust you to run a lemonade stand. Garrett opened his mouth to speak, but I held up the third document. An investigation. Internal misconduct. HR complaints. All buried.
Until now.
One by one, I laid down copies of confidential reports I'd spent months gathering quietly, documents only someone with top-level access could have collected. They'd been running their little empire on lies and intimidation. And now, the empire had a new queen. I slid into the head seat, crossed my legs,
Sipped the coffee.
Now, I said, shall we begin? Silence. Stunning, absolute silence. It clung to the boardroom like fog, thick and suffocating. Garrett still hadn't moved. Charles Brennan's face twitched, as if his brain couldn't compute that someone half his age, dressed without designer flair, just took the very chair he'd ruled from for 17 years. Then it began. You can't just fire a CEO like that, Brennan sputtered. There's process. There are contracts. There were contracts, I said, flipping to the fourth page in my folder, until you voided several fiduciary responsibilities outlined in Clause 3 of your own employment agreement. You manipulated earnings reports, approved massive vendor kickbacks, and you cut corners with labor law compliance so bad, one of our overseas branches is under government review. His lips parted, but no sound. I tapped the paper once. Signed by legal. Approved by the board. Delivered by me. Garrett stood up, so suddenly his chair screeched across the floor. This is a joke. A stunt. You expect us to believe you've been secretly planning a coup while, what, pretending to be an intern? I looked at him.
Cold.
Controlled. No, Garrett, I said. I wasn't pretending. I was an intern, just like everyone else who starts here. The difference is I had the power to change what I saw.
And what I saw was men like you.
I turned toward the projector screen, clicked the remote. Slide 1, expense reports. Garrett's name, over and over. Lavish travel. Personal dinners. A $12,000 conference that turned out to be a ski resort with a private chef. Slide 2, HR complaints. Anonymous reports, most filed by junior staffers, female, under 30. Every single one flagged and resolved within 24 hours. Every single one swept under the rug. Slide 3, supplier fraud. Garrett's signature approving deals where he funneled contracts to his college roommate's failing tech firm at 5 times the market rate. He turned pale. Where did you even? How did you? You think you're clever, I interrupted. But you left a trail so obvious it could have been marked with neon arrows. All I had to do was not look away. Garrett moved to leave. I clicked to slide 4. Security footage. Sit down, I said. Unless you want the elevator to stop at legal on your way out. He froze. Charles was still staring at the table like it betrayed him. I stood. And I told them everything. How I'd started 6 months ago under a fake name, Emily James, with nothing but a laptop and a stack of NDAs. How my father warned me not to intervene. Just observe, he said. But I couldn't. Not when I saw how interns were bullied into staying late with no pay. Not when I saw junior staffers passed over for promotions while senior execs patted each other's egos. Not when I heard a young woman crying in a bathroom stall after being called sweetheart in a budget meeting. You built this company on fear, I said. But fear only works when people feel powerless. I'm here to take that power back. I turned to the others. The quiet ones. The ones who never laughed when Garrett mocked me. Who stayed silent because they didn't want to be next. You don't need to clap, I said. You need to speak up. Because starting today, this company changes. No more silent cruelty. No more unchecked arrogance. One woman, Ava from operations, nodded slowly, eyes glassy. Another man, Joseph, the analytics manager, cleared his throat. What happens now? I smiled.
Now.
I walked toward the whiteboard. Wrote one word. Rebuild. Then I pointed at the door. Brennan, your escort is waiting outside. Garrett? You can either resign quietly or face a formal investigation. The evidence is here. Your choice. Neither moved, but both understood. I sat again, and this time I didn't just take the head seat. I owned it. By the time the boardroom door clicked shut behind Charles Brennan and Garrett Langston, a different kind of silence fell. Not fear this time.
Shock.
Caution. And the stirring sense that something sacred had finally shattered, and in its place, something real might grow. I sat still for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle into my bones. My fingers curled around the armrest. The leather wasn't warm anymore. It was cold, like it hadn't belonged to me until now. I don't expect your trust, I said finally, looking at the 12 remaining executives. Not yet, but I do expect your honesty. So let's start with this. Who here knew about what Brennan and Langston were doing? A few shifted in their seats. Some blinked down at their notes like they'd just remembered a grocery list. Only one hand went up.
Ava.
Quiet, fierce-eyed Ava. Operations manager. 34. Single mom of 2 boys. I knew her full background because I had read every personnel file in that building before the takeover. But this was the first time I was seeing her. I suspected, she said softly, but I didn't have proof. And when I tried to raise it to HR, the complaint disappeared. Who handled it? Garrett's assistant. And HR said it was a miscommunication. Her eyes didn't waver. I believed them, because I couldn't afford not to. I nodded. You have kids. I get it. And I did. I really did. My mother had raised me alone for 10 years before my father came back into my life. She worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford the bus fare some weeks. Fear wasn't just a concept to her. It was dinner.
So here's the deal, I said.
No more disappearing complaints. No more fear. If someone retaliates against anyone for speaking up, they're out. No negotiations. A murmur of relief fluttered through the room. Tiny, fragile, but real. I leaned forward. We have 72 hours before this story hits the media. I'm not hiding what happened today. Transparency is the only way we regain public trust. Joseph raised an eyebrow. You're going public with this? Absolutely. Won't that tank our stock? Maybe in the short term, I said. But you don't rebuild trust with silence. You do it by burning the rod in daylight. And that's when my phone vibrated.
Dad.
I stepped into the hallway to take the call. You went public already? His voice was low, stern. I'm going to, I said. The company deserves it.
A pause.
Then, you sure you're ready for the fallout, Em? I've been ready for 6 months. Another pause. Then, finally, the thing I hadn't realized I needed to hear. I'm proud of you. I swallowed. My voice was quieter now. I didn't do this for pride. I know. That's what makes it matter. He hung up. When I stepped back into the boardroom, Ava stood waiting. Everyone else had gone, giving us a moment alone. You were brave in there, she said, eyes searching mine. But brave doesn't always mean safe. I nodded. I'm not looking for safe. She stepped closer. There's something you need to know. A pause. She glanced around and lowered her voice. Garrett, he wasn't working alone. My stomach twisted. Who? She hesitated, then said one name. Talia Nguyen. Chief Strategy Officer. Quiet.
Polished.
Never once raised her voice or got her hands dirty. She was the last person anyone would suspect, which, of course, made her perfect. I blinked. You're sure? She signed off on every diverted contract Garrett pushed. She even restructured finance to bypass audit flags. Garrett may have been the face, but she was the brain. I breathed in.
Slow.
Focused. Every part of me tightening. Where is she now? In her office. Like nothing ever happened. Of course she was. Of course. I didn't run. I didn't storm. I walked. Controlled. Unflinching. Each step down the hallway felt like cutting through layers of smoke. When I opened her door, Talia was on a call. She smiled when she saw me, like nothing was wrong. I'll call you back, she said sweetly into the phone. Seems our little intern just got promoted. She hung up, and then, with that same calm smile, she said,
So,
"Shall we talk power, Emily?" Talia Nguyen didn't flinch.
she didn't stand.
She didn't pretend to respect me either. She just sat there, legs crossed neatly beneath her designer skirt, manicured fingers tapping slowly against the armrest.
Calm.
Collected, like a chess master mid-game, watching a pawn become something more, and knowing she had already set her trap 6 moves ago. "So," she said, eyes locked on mine, "you're not here to shadow anymore." "No," I said, shutting the door behind me. "I'm here to clean house." She tilted her head. "And let me guess, you think I'm part of the mess?" "I don't think, Talia," I said, walking closer. "I know." I dropped a folder on her desk, just like I had in the boardroom. Supplier fraud. Internal restructuring to avoid oversight. Digital trails from Garrett's schemes that lead straight to your sign-off. She barely looked at it. "I suppose this is the part where you expect me to panic," she said.
Beg. Cry.
"Offer you some watered-down apology so you can feel powerful." "You don't need to cry," I said quietly, "but you'll explain." She leaned forward, and the air in the room thickened. "I built this company, Emily," she whispered. "Not Charles. Not Garrett.
Me.
Every acquisition, every merger, every risk that paid off. I made them happen. I kept us relevant. I kept us alive. And in doing that, I shot back. You buried ethics. You enabled corruption. You looked away when Garrett harassed new hires. You signed contracts that cost employees their pensions just to hit your bonuses." Talia stood. "I did what I had to do." I stepped closer.
No.
"You did what was easy. You were in the perfect position to be the difference. But you chose silence. And silence makes you guilty." She smirked. "You're young. You think justice is clean. That villains announce themselves and consequences land like clockwork. But power, real power, is subtle. It compromises you in small doses. And by the time you realize you're standing on ash, it's too late." Her voice lowered. "I didn't destroy this company, Emily. I protected it. From people like your father." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Oh, you didn't know," she said, turning toward the window. "Ask him why he really bought this place. It wasn't to clean it up. He wanted it gutted. Dismantled. He wants the land, the assets. The rest? Collateral damage." I stared at her. "You're lying." "I wish I were." The floor tilted under me. Not physically, but emotionally. Could my father really have planned this? Bought the company to dismantle it for parts? And set me in, knowing I'd fall in love with what it could become? My throat tightened. Talia turned back to me, softer now. "I don't hate you," she said. "I admire you in a way. But you're still a Monroe. And in this world, that bloodline comes with an expiration date." She walked around the desk, handed me the folder I'd brought in. "I suggest you look deeper into your own side before you start burning mine." And with that, she walked past me and out of her own office. I stood there, alone,
Confused.
angry, and suddenly unsure of who the real villain was. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the office, door locked,
Lights dim.
I pulled every internal record I had access to: land ownership, investor memos, development blueprints. My fingers trembled as I traced names and dates. And then I saw it. 6 months from now, the Kessler campus would be sold, split into parcels, demolished. A planned sale buried under 10 layers of shell companies, disguised as a restructuring plan. Talia hadn't been lying. My father never wanted to fix Kessler. He wanted to erase it. I stared at the screen, breath shallow, and I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a battle between me and Garrett, or me and Brennan. It wasn't even me versus Talia. This was me versus my own father. The sun hadn't even risen when I stood alone in the executive boardroom again. Same chair, same view, different world. I hadn't told anyone what I found yet. Not Ava. Not Joseph. And definitely not my father. I just sat there, staring at the room that had once mocked me, now mine to command, and felt nothing but pressure in my chest. Heavy. Suffocating. Like the truth was too big for my lungs. At 7:42 a.m., my phone rang. Dad. I didn't answer. At 7:51, he called again. Still, I didn't answer. But at 8:03 a.m., he walked through the boardroom door. No warning. No assistance. Just Richard Monroe himself, billionaire investor, feared strategist, and the man who once told me bedtime stories about honesty, now standing before me like the villain in a story I didn't know I was in. He looked around the room and smiled faintly.
You did it, he said.
Took them down in one move. I'm impressed. I didn't smile back. You lied to me. He sighed and walked to the window. I didn't lie, he said. I gave you a job to do. You did it. I opened the folder on the table, the one with the demolition contracts and shell corporations and hidden ownership transfers. I slid it toward him. You were never planning to fix this place. He turned slowly.
No.
You were going to gut it. Yes. My throat burned. Why? He walked toward me, calm as ever. Because this place was a decaying asset. Brennan ran it into the ground. The board was corrupt. The infrastructure's outdated. The land is worth more than the company. It was a numbers game, Emily. No, I said, voice low. It was a people game. His eyes hardened. I taught you better than to get emotional about business. You taught me to think, I said. To observe. To protect what matters. And what matters, Emily? Over-leveraged stockholders? Employees too timid to speak up? A brand name that's lost 30% value over 3 quarters. What matters, I said, rising to my feet, are the people I worked with. The ones you didn't bother to learn about. Ava, who came in every day at 6 a.m. just to get home in time to cook for her sons. Joseph, who rebuilt the analytics department from scratch with zero support. Interns who gave everything they had just for the chance of a job. You see losses. I see lives. He leaned in, voice colder. And you'll go broke trying to save them. I stepped closer. Then I'll go broke doing the right thing. A pause. Then he laughed, soft, bitter. You sound just like your mother. That made my jaw clench. Good. We stood in silence. The kind that breaks bloodlines. Finally he spoke. So, what now? I picked up the phone. Dialed PR. Prepare a press release. Effective immediately, Kessler Dynamics will not be sold, dismantled, or transferred. He frowned. You don't have that authority. I met his gaze. I do now. I pulled out the final document, the one I signed last night with the board's emergency vote. A change in proxy. My shares, plus enough from staff and mid-level investors who believed in what I was doing, gave me control. Full control. He looked at the signature. Then at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw something flicker in his eyes that I never expected to see. Respect. You just declared war on me, Emily. No, I said softly. I declared independence. By noon, the press had the story. By 4 p.m., I had calls from 3 competing investors asking if I needed support. By 7 p.m., Ava brought me coffee without a word, but with tears in her eyes. The good kind. The kind that says finally, someone stood up. The headlines read, Investor's daughter takes over broken empire, saves it from her own father. Kessler Dynamics, reborn under young CEO. From intern to powerhouse, Emily Monroe breaks the system. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the look in Ava's eyes. The way the interns smiled without fear. The way no one laughed in meetings anymore, unless it was real. That night, as I walked out of the building and into the city lights, I realized something. They once told me, people like you don't belong in executive meetings. They were right. Because I don't just belong there. I run them now. And I'll never let another woman be told otherwise again.